All right, we are back. So the feedback session is so helpful to have when we are now going to talk about crucial conversations. I think on your agenda it says courageous conversations, and very similar to what I was saying this morning about influence and persuasion. There's overlap. I would say there's some overlap here too. But when you talk about crucial or courageous conversations, I think it kind of takes it to a little bit of another level. All the foundations that Scott talked about related to feedback applies, but now at a little bit of a higher level with some additional aspects to it. So as you just think about courageous or crucial conversations, what does that make you think about? How might that be a little bit different, just thinking of the title, than feedback? Because feedback, you have to be courageous to accept it and to give it. But any thoughts about what it might mean to have a crucial or courageous conversation? Just anything? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, very much so. Yes, in the back.
Truth to power.
Truth to power. Very good. That's always a hard one, right? When you think about crucial or courageous ones, you know, you're talking to someone perhaps who would be considered above you, powerful, has influence in how the outcome of that could be. Anything else? Sorry?
High risk of failure.
High risk of failure, yes. Could be very risky. Yeah.
Somebody goodbye. Somebody goodbye.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Somebody goodbye.
Fire somebody. Fire somebody. Yeah, yes, absolutely. So these are all additional things in your giving feedback. And why might those conversations be ones in which we would avoid? Like similar to feedback, you know, we talked about how people kind of want to avoid feedback. How about for crucial and courageous conversations, why might we avoid them? Yeah, yep, coming together can be very scary and could have other effects, not just for the two people, but perhaps in the healthcare system as well. Yeah, so these are pretty challenging, can be. I think we all probably think, do we really want to have these conversations? But the longer you avoid having a conversation like this, the worse it can get. So it's pretty important to have them. So we'll talk a little bit more as we started out with what are crucial or courageous conversations. Why do we avoid them? We spoke a little bit about that. And I'm going to give you some ideas on how to approach them. Because if you don't have them, the ramifications of that can be worse. So you really want to be prepared and ready to have a crucial conversation. So when is it a crucial conversation instead of feedback? We kind of started to talk about that. Stakes are high. They could really have an impact on the relationship, could have an impact within your organization. If you don't have them, you could have negative consequences because things aren't necessarily going to change. And so you have to come together to have that conversation. Here it is, action is required by both parties because it really is two people coming together. It's similar to feedback. It certainly is a conversation that two people are having to come to an agreement on what we've decided and where we've gotten to that point. So someone had said this, emotions are strong. Now that can happen with feedback, but it's almost like when you know you're going to have one of these conversations, you know the emotions are going to be there. You're walking into a conversation where emotions can be very high. Stakes are high, and the opinions differ. So that's where it's really very hard, because when you get feedback, maybe Opinions aren't necessarily ones that are different or counter to the other, but here it's often that your opinions are differing. So crucial conversations you can have at work, crucial conversations you can have at home with your spouse, with your kids, with anybody. And I think it's pretty common to kind of avoid them because they can be difficult. And that's why we wanted to talk about them, so that we can give you some sort of tools or some ammunition on how to have them. And as was said, they can be more difficult when you're dealing with people of power or your boss. You know, that's pretty challenging to think about having one of these conversations with someone you report to. But if you don't, the ramifications of that could be pretty bad. So you want to make sure that you do that. Crucial conversations at work with a peer, that can be hard too. Now, I had a situation probably a year ago where a peer of mine, I had to have a crucial conversation with him. And that is because he had sent in an email a negative comment about somebody who works for me. And my feeling was that really was not right. And I felt like I had to defend my person. Now, this is, you know, a senior person who I disagreed with what they had said, and clearly they thought what they were saying was correct. And it was something that I knew I had to do right away. I contacted him. I said, we have to have a conversation. We had that within 2 days. And so I think the sense that you may have, and I'm curious to hear from you, I knew we had to have that conversation. I knew that we couldn't go forward in our relationship as peers, as colleagues, without having that conversation, because I felt very defensive about my person. Have any of you been in that situation where something has been said or something has occurred where you just absolutely knew a conversation was needed? So conversation is often avoided. We kind of spoke about this. Sometimes you're afraid it's going to make the situation worse. But I think on the counter of that, you understand that if you don't have the conversation, no matter how the outcome is, and you hope it's a positive outcome in which you've come to an agreement, if you don't have the conversation, it can make things worse. So there's sort of two sides to that first bullet. So we choose between sharing our thoughts and saying nothing to keep the relationship. But again, I would argue that in my situation, my relationship with that person was going to be a problem. And that's somebody who I work with, and I needed to make sure that that relationship continued in a way that was positive, and we both agreed on the situation. And here again, we talked about this. It's common that we don't confront people in positions of authority. And I was reading something a couple of weeks ago about how this one particular person in a group was really good about having a conversation with their boss. And this happened to be a CEO in an organization. And the person who was describing how good this person is was saying that what he did was he thought about what was important to the CEO, and to go to the CEO and say, you're not really following what you talk about is important. And what he used to talk about was important was making sure that his people understood where he was in a situation, was clear with people. And so the position of authority is very difficult, but I think the idea is that if you can stick to the facts, but again, speak to what's important to that person, then you can get them to really sort of come around and understand, well, this is important to me, and this is why I should change the way I approach things. So it was an interesting approach to their CEO, and this person seemed to be much better at it than others. So one of the reasons why we think conversations are difficult is because we may be arguing about what conclusions we have made. And so I was at a meeting last week where this person was saying that he had been told that he only got the job because he was African American. And that was something that happened in the office. And he said, well, that's very interesting because that's really sort of in your head. When I go home and talk to my wife, she says, I am brilliant and I got that job because I'm so smart. And so the point that he was making is that we all make up these stories in our heads about how things are. And the point is that it's not always the reality. And when he said that, I can tell you the audience was just like, wow, how important that was that he had brought that forward. And so we really have to be thinking about my reality may not be your reality. So it kind of says, well, what is the reality? So anyway, so we argue about our conclusions. And so here's an example, one perspective in a meeting. So I've been in this situation. I've been in a meeting where I've had people who have their computer open. And so one conclusion could be, here I'm with a team member, I'm asking for input from them, and they're sitting on a computer. And so I'm thinking, he's not engaged. He's not really participating here. He never listens. He's not a team player. His perspective is, I'm trying to find the answer to a question that just came up in the meeting. There's some question about the data or the information that may be helpful. So I'm actively being helpful by being on the internet to try and get the answer to the question we're talking about. I'm thinking, you're not paying attention. He's thinking, I'm here to help. And so I'm going to look up the answer. So my interpretation, he wasn't listening. His interpretation, greater help to check without interrupting. So I'm not even going to tell them what I'm doing. And so I'm sitting there thinking, he's surfing the internet, and he's sitting there thinking, I'm looking to get data about what we're talking about. So two different realities, right? And I'm really disappointed because I want him to participate, and he's like, I'm trying to help. So it just brings home the point that what I'm thinking may not be what they're thinking, and so you need to come to conclusion and have a discussion about the situation. So I think this is sort of an interesting thing for us to think about. It's called the ladder of influence. You start at the bottom where you think you're taking in all the information that there is, and you kind of move up the rung of the ladder. So you select data from what you observe. Then you start moving up. You add meaning to that data. You make assumptions based on that meaning. So similar to the person in the meeting who's on the computer, you're thinking he's not a team player. I'm making assumptions, he's not paying attention. I'm drawing conclusions that he's not helpful. And then I have the beliefs about him. It's like he's really not a great team player. And so then you take actions based on your beliefs. So it's really thinking about your reality and how you interpret things may not really be the way things are. And so you need to be able to have a discussion with somebody, and you need to have a conversation. And so this is really saying that the beliefs may not be true. Certainly that example of somebody being on a computer. You think that the truth is obvious, that it's based on real data, but the data we select, we think it's real, but it may not be. And so that's where you could come up with different conclusions, and that's where you're sort of not agreeing on what those conclusions may be. So this is an activity that I did once in a program that I was in that I found really quite powerful. And so what I want you to do with the first two bullets, I want you to write about a conflict that you've had with somebody at work. It doesn't have to be at work, it could be at home, it could be anywhere. But think about a conflict that you had and write down what is the issue from your perspective. So that's the first step. And so I'm going to give you some time to go ahead and write that down, because it really, I think, I have found it's pretty helpful in situations in which I'm trying to figure things out. Any questions about what I'm asking you to do here? So when you're ready, then turn it around and put yourself in their shoes. And what do you think the issue is from their perspective now? You started with your perspective. What do you think is their perspective? Then think about, do you both have a common goal? What might that goal be? So I'm curious to hear from people. How did that feel, first of all? How was it to do that? Did anybody find it helpful? Did anybody find it not helpful?
Yeah, eye-opening.
Eye-opening, thank you. That's how I felt too. It's like, whoa. Yeah.
I was a little bit confused to perform this activity because I'm probably a happy person
Uh-huh.
who probably avoided the vast majority of the conflicts which may occur. Just they was I can't describe this situation as the conflict. Probably it was some kind of a misunderstanding at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
which was solved just with some clarifications and conversations, and that's all. So it was not pure conflict.
Yeah.
It was some kind of misunderstanding, just some words of clarification, that's all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I didn't perform this activity, sorry.
You did or did not?
No, because I could not describe any case as a true conflict.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Did you have any case in which it didn't? No, you didn't have any. Yeah, you're pretty lucky. Yeah, yeah. Other thoughts about it? Yes.
I think it's easier to analyze it from distance.
Yes.
You have time to digest it. But if you are in the situation, that is a lot more difficult
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to put yourself in the other person's shoes.
Yeah.
Because of the emotions and the like strict reaction you are getting. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot more difficult
Yeah.
than right now.
Could you see this being helpful in the future, though, as you're saying, to sort of step back and you're not in the middle of the situation and thinking about it?
Yeah, I think, but it definitely takes work.
Yeah, 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 yep. It takes work for sure, but in some ways I wonder if it helps repair a relationship, because sometimes it just gets blown out of proportion, right? It just, you get down this path of, I can't work with this person, this is just not gonna, go well. But if you can kind of step back, and it's similar to what I was saying earlier, you always have to be thinking about the other person and their perspective. Because if you get in your own head and what your reality is, it may not be what really is going on. And so it's important to think about what's going on in somebody else's head. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I find it very helpful, and it just stresses the importance to be prepared, and maybe before we go into this conversation to really sit down and do these lists
Mm-hmm.
from the both perspectives.
Yeah, yeah,
And to have a common goal that can be very tricky.
yeah.
I think
Mm-hmm.
if there is a common goal.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and sometimes that's a way in which you can deal with people who you find hard to work with or hard or difficult to work with, is thinking about, okay, there is a goal, a common goal that we both have, that we both want to achieve. And that goal is important. And so, yes, it may be challenging and difficult to work with this particular person, but if you can focus on what is the common goal, then I think sometimes it's easier to move forward. Any other thoughts, comments? Yeah.
Even if we have a common goal, doesn't mean that we have the same perspective, because if we are not on the same level, if someone is seeing the bigger picture, then our common goal is the same, and they just share a part of my common goal if I'm above them. So it's all about the perspective from which we look at things. So I wouldn't say it's a conflict. It was a difficult conversation. It was 9 years ago. My former boss called me in for a conversation. At that moment, I was on my second year after being qualified as a specialist. So he asked me why I always had something to complain, something. I was, from his perspective, I was difficult to work with. Why? Because I've seen problems. He recently was appointed as a boss. There are two much more experienced colleagues who weren't selected, who are older than him, more experienced, better clinical clinicians, and yet he do I want? For you to make changes. If you are a boss, then make changes. Otherwise, why are you there? You need to be here for us. We need to move forward. So yes, I put myself in his shoes. Yes, I would probably act the same. So he asked me, so what do you think I failed? What do you do in my position? I said, I wouldn't accept that position in the first place. You don't have 10 years of clinical experience and you're a leader to someone who has 30 years of clinical experience. They won't call you when they are in a difficult situation. No one calls you in a difficult situation. So we kind of had a common goal. Both of us wanted that department to move forward, to be a better one. He said, well, do you respect me? Yes, I respect you as a boss, but no, I don't respect you as a urologist. So that is the end of our conversation.
I bet.
I'm surprised it was
He
here.
was the only one happy when we left the hospital.
Sounds like he didn't really have much credibility with you. Yeah, not from the very beginning.
So it's all about the perspective. My perspective was bigger than his, and he was at a higher level than I was. So
Yeah.
we shared the common goal.
Yeah.
We all want this department to be better, but how to do it, we kind of disagree.
That's what it was, how to do it. So his perspective was a different way of doing it than yours was.
And more narrower, I would say.
Yeah.
Narrow. Not different. Of course, sometimes it is.
Yeah.
But more narrower. And that disappointed me that I have a bigger picture than he does.
Yes.
Do you think it's not just your opinion?
Yeah, hey,
It's
share.
not, no, it's like, yesterday we just talked about that it's not enough to be a good physician, to be a leadership. Maybe you can have,
No.
you could be a good leadership who have background experience like 30, 20 years, but you will be not a good leadership.
9 years away, whoever was worth left that department. There was a huge change. Now he's still chief of the department. They do 60% less surgeries than they did in my time, our time that we were together. They do less complex surgeries. They have more complications. So he had objective outcomes that confirm he's not a good leader.
Maybe that was his vision to have it like.
To destroy the
Yeah.
I have one question. Knowing what you know today from this training,
Yeah.
would that talk to conversation to your boss be different?
No. You don't have credibility in my eyes. He has to have credibility in a way, in whatever way. If he's a good manager, if he brings new equipment because he secured funds, okay. If he's good in organizing us to do our job, yeah, perfect. Do that. That's your job as a manager, as a leader. Organize us. Give us job. Give us funds. Give us equipment. We'll sort that out. Or be first among equals. Show us how to do better. Train us. Teach us. Or be an exemplary researcher. Do a research. Establish research unit. Bring research to bedside. Whatever. But you need to do something.
I can tell you have a lot of passion here on this one. Yeah, strong feelings. Yeah, still going. Can you imagine 9 years ago? Whoa. Yeah, I hear. Okay, yes.
I can give just a short comment on this.
Uh-oh, we're going to keep going.
In our country,
Okay.
people like this on the higher position.
Yeah.
Because they would like to save their positions and eliminate the others. And that's the only way that they stay on the position of the very no change. It's simple and
It's difficult, yeah.
then it's very difficult to
Yeah. Thank you.
He just supported his
He
kid.
asked me really good question.
Yeah.
What will you do in my case?
Yes.
He just kind of,
Or
it's like, give me advice. Maybe I don't see. Maybe you will show me. But you just say, I will not take your, I will take your position. Or what did you say after? Or you just say, no, I will
I think we're demonstrating how these are very difficult conversations. There's all this emotion coming through. Okay, we need to move on. Yeah, we got to move on. Okay, do we have another example here? All right, let's go on to just a couple more slides and we'll wrap up here. So this is sort of another approach to think about making your thinking visible so people understand how you got to the conclusion that you got to. And so this is another approach besides thinking about how the other person is feeling and what their reality is to think about make your thinking process visible. So from that thinking, people draw conclusions, they interpret the data, they select the data, and they come to an assumption. As you're having this conversation that you decided is important to have because you need to move forward, you want to talk about, these are my conclusions, and this is my assumption. And so this is what I had to do when I had this conversation with my peer. This is my understanding from that email that you sent. My conclusion is you're saying this and you thinking that. And my assumption is you think this is not a good employee. Here are the data that I based them on, the data that I saw in the email, and here's how I got there. So it presents sort of my argument, my basis for how I've made a conclusion. So then on the other side, you ask the other person to make their thinking visible. So what were you thinking when you sent that email? What were you thinking about that particular person? What conclusions did you draw? How did you interpret the data? And then what were the assumptions? So you're coming together to sort of lay out all the information and all the things that you're thinking and what they're thinking, so it's out there on the table. And if you don't, then you don't really know how to move forward without having that information. And so you really want to encourage the others, as hard as that can be, because you're in a situation in which it's uncomfortable, it's a difficult conversation, but you want to say, so, what am I missing here? This is what I've interpreted, this is my assumption, this is what you're thinking. What are the gaps here? And do you have different information? And clearly this other person, when I had this conversation with them, had other thoughts. And so it helped to make that information very clear, different assumptions, but at least we got to a common ground where I understood what he was thinking, he understood what I was thinking, and then we could move forward. So I think without having that conversation, it would have really damaged our relationship. So you want to put it all together. You want to make your thinking process visible. You want to ask them what they were thinking, and you come together with a clear agreement on what the situation was all about. And so during the discussion, as we've talked about in other situations, you want to have an open mindset, you want to be curious, you want to be calm, you don't want to have high emotions, you want to be respectful, and just state the facts and really be thinking about what is the mutual goal, what is the common goal that you're both trying to achieve, because that's really why you're working together to get to that point. So just a couple of more tips as I wrap up. Having difficult conversations, you want to come from a perspective of being curious, but you also have to be respectful. As soon as that respect goes out the door, you have lost everything. Nobody wants to deal with somebody who's not being respectful towards them. So that is an important component of having any of these conversations. You want to be direct. You want to expect a positive outcome. That's really the goal. So summary, be clear on the topic, determine what you want, be aware of your emotions, because these are very high emotional situations. You want to be aware of them. You want to check yourself, make sure it's safe to move forward. If it's not safe, just stop. As Scott had talked earlier about feedback, you stop and you say, okay, let's meet tomorrow. Let's get together again, but right now we need to stop because we're not moving forward in an effective way. Share your facts, ask their view, and then decide what you're going to be doing next. And then these are just some resources. One thing I do want to mention about the resources, some of them, not necessarily here, but in some of the other talks, have been older resources. And that's really because it's from people who are the sort of the leaders in leadership. And so some of them are very old, but they're like the foundational articles that I wanted you to have. So with that, I'm going to stop and see if you guys have any questions or comments. Yes?